Coming up, the NBA free agency frenzy is well underway, but the Brooklyn Nets are just taking it easy, letting it all unfold before them. We break down why that's perfect for the Nets, all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Marnbrick. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. All summer long, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. And Doug, NBA free agency started, and technically, yes, the Brooklyn Nets brought back Nic Claxton. But other than that, this is unfolding the way we thought it would. No pressure for Sean Marks and the Nets now. Let everybody else deal with the chaos to start.
Yeah, it's funny because there is, enormous pressure still on the Nets. It's just in a very different kind of way now. And it's so different that I think even us fans are trying to, are getting ourselves like sort of back into like what if the new ideas around success are going to look like, right? And so at this point, the new ideas around success where the Nets are concerned is like sort of prudency and just like a very, very conservative approach to how they're going to go into this season, which is to say, they make their one signing, Nic Claxton, for $100 million over 4 years. That's kind of the, hey, you've been here for a while and we kind of got to spend the money. So here you go. It's not a knock on him. I'm glad it's a massive payday for him, but it kind of fits two separate things. It's like, we got to hit the salary floor and someone's got to come back. So
might as well be the guy we know, we drafted and we've developed. Like, you deserve it more than anybody else, so we're going to give $100 million to.
Exactly, and you should do that. Like, that's good. That's a good thing. And by the way, in compared to the Isaiah Hartenstein contract, it looks kind of maybe like a deal.
Like
87 million over 3 years.
OKC. Watch out.
87 for over 3 for him. And now for iHeart, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, Claxton might be on a deal here. So all things considered, where the Nets stand right now with free agency is wait and see where everyone else goes, see where the landing spots for teams are, see where once it's kind of over, which teams feel like they didn't maybe totally get there and need to make some deals for either Cam Johnson, for Dorian Finney-Smith, for the guy. Honestly, according to the latest reporting, it seems like everybody's on the table now. See what other teams are going to need and just kind of play out the string. And from a Nets perspective and Sean Marks' perspective, this is exactly what needs to be done. So while there's no short-term pressure to go out and sign guys, the pressure now becomes making really long-term deals that set the Nets up sort of perfectly for the next couple of seasons and beyond. And there's still time to do that with like the way the roster is currently constructed.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned it there about seeing how it unfolds, because we've already seen, right? Paul George was everyone waiting for him to decide what he was going to do. Some people looking at the Clippers and wondering, what are you thinking? You're going to keep James Harden around on 2 for 70 and you're going to let Paul George walk out the door. Either way, when he finally goes to Philadelphia, then everybody starts making all these supplemental moves. But you're already seeing certain teams like the Lakers who seem to be struggling to figure out how they're going to get this roster to the next level. You got LeBron James saying he's willing to take a massive pay cut in the right set of circumstances, and yet they can't get somebody like Klay Thompson in the door, who ends up going to Dallas. And if you're Brooklyn, it's like you're just making a list of all the teams that are trying to do things right now and aren't succeeding. Because when they come back around and they weren't able to get player X, Y, or Z, you go, hey, like you said, we're open for business. Anybody, look at the entire roster, baby. Anything you want is on the table here. And hopefully, if you're Sean Marks and the Nets, you get to say, and the price point maybe is going to be a little steeper than you wanted it to be, team X or Y, because you need it. We don't. And that's what we talked about also coming into this. Nets can go into the regular season having Cam Johnson on the roster. That's not going to hurt them. They can go all the way to the deadline if they had to with certain players on this roster to make sure they get the best version of supplementing what they already did with the Bridges trade.
Yeah, and look, there's going to be teams that, like we said, have gotten to this point and just don't maybe have like sort of functional answers for what they're trying to accomplish, right? And so because the Nets, obviously their goals are pretty set here. It's like let's get into the bottom 5 and we'll see you next season. There's lots of other teams that just don't have those same aspirations, usually because they have like a bunch of high-end talent already on the team, and they just can't really go the other direction, right? And so while we talk, you mentioned Philly, you mentioned some of these other teams in the East. Obviously, the Knicks reloaded, courtesy of the Nets. Sorry, the Celtics are where they are.
Yeah.
But we're still waiting for some other teams. Like there's other teams out there that haven't made any moves, but might feel the need to get better. And that list is not as short as you think it is. I mean, Cleveland has not really done anything here. Like what are they looking at going forward, going into next year? What are the Kings thinking? Right? Like we saw the Pelicans kind of retool a little bit for DeJounte Murray. You already mentioned the Lakers. Like they're going to need to get better players, right? Like where do the Grizzlies stand around John Morant and Triple J, right? Like do they need more wings? I mean, there are teams here that have not done anything in free agency at all. The Heat, right? The Heat are about to lose Caleb Martin. Like they're possibly. There's just a pretty, not like super long, but there are enough teams out here that need to still upgrade, probably have looked around the landscape and said like, whoa, there's some teams that got better here. And we need to go back and forward face with our stars and kind of tell them we're still trying to get better too. And now all of a sudden the list of like available, realistic, NBA ready, solid contributors available is just getting shorter. And so I think we're going to see this free agency play out. And then we're going to see those other teams that did not have a headline in free agency at all kind of maybe come calling. And I think that's from a Nets perspective, that has to feel good, even though it's kind of quiet on that front right now.
On the back end of this episode, all of the players being available, what would that look like for Brooklyn? But coming up next, when we think about wanting to be as close to the top of the draft in 2025 as possible, why certain teams are doing the Nets a favor and committing to being good this year. We'll dive into the Detroit Pistons of it all in just one moment.
All right, before we get into that, tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Look, you love sports. I love sports. We all love sports. We love them so much. We never want them to stop. The NBA playoffs is over. That season's done, but we got fewer games kind of just across the board. That's sometimes what happens here in the summer. Look, it's pre-football. Got MLB, though, going all summer long, and they got so much stuff happening on FanDuel when it comes to baseball. Even like right now, if you go over to FanDuel and you just look at you got a four-leg same-game parlay going with the Reds and the Yankees. It's got Aaron Judge to record 2+ total bases, and then you combine it with little Ellie De La Cruz to record 2+ total bases. Maybe some Juan Soto thrown in there as well. It's happening over at FanDuel. They got boosts every single day. They got deals happening every single day all summer long. Look, sports might have taken a little bit of a break. That's not what's happening over on FanDuel. Head on over to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, the other side of what's going on right now in free agency, teams making moves. But if we think about it for the Brooklyn Nets and wanting to be locking themselves in as high as they possibly can inside of that lottery and going for the number 1 overall pick or at least a top prospect, you have to love watching Detroit, who agrees to an extension with Cade Cunningham, but also lands Tim Hardaway via trade from the Mavs. They also signed Tobias Harris, returning back to Detroit after years in Philadelphia. They get Wendell Moore Jr. Via trade as well from the Wolves. Like, they are trying as a team that has struggled. They also hired a Bickerstaff after he got fired from Cleveland. They're trying to make this a competitive basketball team because Detroit keeps trying, keeps failing. So they're going for it. Now,
that's great. That's great news for the Nets, by the way. All these teams, everyone try. Please, everyone go ahead and try. Like that's great news.
And they're doing everything they can. Now, whether or not I think it's going to work out for them in the grand scheme of competing, neither here nor there. The point is they're making themselves better, which
it's not here, it's there. It won't work, but whatever. Like, who cares? But go ahead and try. Yeah, more power.
But hopefully it works to the level of more wins than the Brooklyn Nets. And pre all of these moves, you would look at a team like Detroit and say, yeah, like this is one of the teams we could be competing with inside of the lottery. Instead, they go ahead and take some steps. Washington's another team like this, even though I can't really totally figure out what they're up to. They sign Valanciunas, but that's like a deal that seems prepared to be traded at some point over the course of this season on a 3-year, $33 million, whatever it is. They're at least somewhere in these muddled middle grounds. The Brooklyn Nets right now are the only team that are saying, we're not signing anybody. we're waiting for phone calls on everybody, and hopefully every other team thinks that they want to be competitive this year. Like things are at least from afar lining up the way Brooklyn would hope they would over this offseason, including even the bad teams trying to get better.
Yeah, and look, I get it. Like some of these teams have been in this situation for too long, and they simply just can't keep. I mean, the Nets are like, afforded this maybe, and I get it. Why like some season ticket holders, and we've heard from some of them out there, and I feel for you, everyone out there, like have shown some frustration here because prices are what they are, and the teams definitely headed in a different direction. It's year one of this. Let's see what everyone's patience is in year three, right? These are like this is the long game. Some of these teams simply can't go back to the fans and be like,
yeah,
guess what? Let's get number one. Like the Pistons just can't do it. Like they gotta go try a little bit here, right? Cade, Tobias, is the team going to be good? No. Could it be interesting? Maybe. Right. So some of these teams just simply can't go back to their fans and do that. There's a few that can. The Nets can right now. I think the Wizards are probably still in that realm right now, but you still got to spend the money and, maybe try a little bit. And I know they're like, yeah, we'll try a little bit. And then when we lose it's not going to be too hard to lose with this team, right? Even, a Chewy signing notwithstanding. But then you get, even like the Spurs, it's like, well, look, Wembanyama's good now. Let's get Chris Paul. Like, let's go try to do something cool here. And maybe we can make a playoffs. Maybe just Wembanyama's just too good to tank, right? like we saw, he's just like too good of a player. We got some young, interesting guys. Pop's not getting any younger. Let's just kind of do something now and see how it goes. So I think that the way that this is kind of unfolding for the Nets is that we're in this realm of some of these bad teams have been bad for too long. They just have to just go out and just can't look their fans in the face for another season with this, right? It's just like we simply get
no, guys. Next year, that's when we're gonna totally.
And by the way, these are the teams that people bring up when referencing why the Nets shouldn't have taken this path. I get this. Right. It's like oh well, you want to be the Hornets and the Wizards? Well, of course not. Of course not. But that's not how it always works out for these teams. Like, so if you're managed well, you can kind of reset pretty quickly. Some of these teams have run out the string on their ability to honestly go back and forward face with anyone who actually pays money to go to the games. And so they're going to all try. Again, with tanking, the smooth odds, it's a little easy to kind of get back toward the bottom at the end of the year. But where the Nets are concerned, if the goal is to finish dead last, because that has slightly marginal odds better than, finishing second to last and third to last, they are setting up really well. And this free agency period, for the most part, has worked out like even around the rest of the league as good as you could imagine when on the outside looking in from Brooklyn.
And, just when you mentioned a team like the Spurs and Wembanyama, it's also like, that's a transcendent generational type talent that comes into the league. It doesn't hurt. Is Cooper Flagg or Ace Bailey going to be a transcendent level of talent? Well, that's a certain combination of size and skill set can, elevate a player like Wemby to that kind of status coming into the league. But if you spike it at the right time, it's like Wemby and the Spurs relative to Cade and Detroit. Cade's a really great player, really good. Just got signed to extension. It's awesome. But it's not of the level where even in bad seasons, the fan base is like, yeah, but look at this kid, right? But there's always that hope of what you can build around. So I think that's an interesting relative factor as well. The other thing that we're kind of, I think, seeing here across this too, I think in a good way, because the CBA, obviously, in this first and second aprons and how restrictive it can be, and you can't combine contracts and all these different things, it forces some teams to make some hard choices, excuse me, which always gets me emotional. And I hate when teams have to make difficult choices financially. But instantly, you get Philadelphia, who's still going to have they sign the extension for Maxey. They still have Embiid, and then they add Paul George. And you take a step back and you go, all right, well, I suppose it is restrictive, but some teams are still able to spend the big dollars. Boston's going to be in an absolute disaster mode probably in the years to come with the contracts they have on the books. But I do think that you're seeing the CBA work in the way that the NBA was hoping for it. Guys are still going to get paid. They're just going to start getting spread out a little bit more across the league. And even though Philly represents maybe one of the last kind of big three versions, newly established big three versions, I think that's what they're hoping for is let's make you go somewhere else. Now, Philadelphia is not a small market team, nor would you put it on the level maybe of an LA. I think the dream here for the NBA would have been that Paul George goes to Orlando. Like, oh, now you start to spread it out to a new team and bring up some of those mid-tier kind of competition levels in the Eastern and Western Conference. But I like the way this looks in free agency. Do you Like, do you appreciate what the CBA is restrictively forced some teams to do, and maybe what it's going to lead to in allowing other hopefully rosters to come up and maybe shrink, right? We're trying to shrink the margins between the 1 seeds and the 12 seeds just so that it makes a little bit more competitive basketball consistently.
Okay, so I'm of two minds about this. On the one hand, from
Okay.
a Nets perspective, I like it right now because it's going to help them. It's going to help them,
Right.
I
Right.
think, get better quicker because these other teams are going to put themselves into disaster mode quicker. Like the Knicks could be looking really staring down the barrel at some of these same problems a couple of years from now, right in the timeline of where the Nets are going to start getting some of their picks, right? We already know the
Right.
Milwaukee thing is already starting to hamstring them. It's not going to be soon enough with where the Nets pick stands there. But like some of these other teams, and then some of these other teams are going to be in such dire straits, possibly, that a team that has like cap flexibility and asset flexibility could be in the mode of sort of what Sean Marks did before, taking on other teams' disasters. And now, but then the Nets didn't have any other assets. Now they're going to have assets and the ability to do it. So I think like
Yeah.
as teams navigate this second apron specifically and try to figure out how to get them essentially out of themselves out of jail once they've gotten themselves into it, I think a team like the Nets will be set up really well to be like, it's funny because I think what we're seeing now is teams are just coming to grips with some of what this means. And I think they still don't totally get it. And so
Yeah.
the Nets are going to be in a position like 2 years from now where it's like, oh, now you really get it. Now we're here. So I think like over the next 2 years, we're going to see the Nets probably help out some of these other teams who finally get online and be like, what happened to us here? Like, what can't we do? And I
Yeah.
think that like the Nets are going to be positioned. I do think from like an NBA perspective, it does seem really punitive. I'm not of the mind right away to be like, oh, this is great. I think it seems it's a little too hard cappy. I get a little bit worried about like sort of like the middle tier of players in the NBA and sort of like their ability to get paid when it comes to some of this stuff. I'm holding out a little bit
Right at
of,
the top of the top. Yeah.
yeah,
It's
I'm
like
holding
top of the
out.
top gets paid, and then the middle tier of players gets wider, and the contracts get
It
smaller
feels
for the
like it
larger
because it's
percentage of the league.
like
Yeah.
at some point you just like, overpaying for those guys is really where you're going to get really crushed. And so I'm I'm not positive that like from an NBA perspective, it's amazing, but I get like why they were at least trying to do it because when you look at some of these
Yeah.
teams and you're like, hey, like the Warriors, the Clippers, like some of these teams are just spending all the money and you're trying to make it so the OKCs and the Orlandos can kind of stay relevant because no one's ever going to sign a free agent contract there of like the very top players. I get it, but I'm not totally been like this is the best thing ever. It does feel a little draconian to me, but I'm going to reserve the right to kind of maybe change that opinion at some point.
Yeah. I wouldn't say this is, home run swing across the board for the NBA. And I think maybe the hardest part about it is you say teams coming to the reality of it is now, again, it was a CBA, it was negotiated, everyone understood the plan that was being put in place, but
I'm not sure they
it's
did, by the way.
okay, right.
I'm not 100% sure they totally understood it. I think they understood it. Like, I'm not saying they're like dumb or anything. They're clearly not. These guys are all really, really smart. It's not that. It's like sometimes I think it's a little hard in the moment to understand what the down chain effects of something that seems really good on paper. Most ideas that end up being bad started on someone's desk as a good idea. And then when we got down when the memo got
Practical
passed all the way
application.
down, yeah, like then it just turned into a bad idea. So like I don't know. Sorry to interrupt you, but I'm not
No.
I think sometimes it's hard to see exactly what all the effects are going to be.
No, and I think, and it's maybe it's kind of making the point of understanding on paper what it meant, but the reality of, but we've been operating a certain way for the past
Yep.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Oh, this actually requires like big immediate decisions to adjust to this. And that can then have, as you mentioned, the down chain effects and how it ends up impacting your roster. So I don't know. In the long run, I think it's good for the league, but maybe that is, to your point, going the other way. Time to reserve judgment. We'll see how it pans out. And ultimately, if it puts Brooklyn in a good spot to be a competitive team, in 2 years from now, then I think it's a great idea. And the CBA works flawlessly. Coming up here in a second, when we talk about everybody being available on the roster, who would that include? And does it change the perspective of what this rebuild looks like, specifically when we talk about young players in this core for Brooklyn? We'll get into that to close out today in just one moment. All right, so as we wrap up today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about the NBA free agency, big teams making big moves, the Brooklyn Nets just lying in the weeds and relaxing. There was stuff we mentioned the other day. Brian Lewis has been doing a great job for the New York Post covering everything, including pouring some cold water, not only on the idea that Brooklyn is either shopping or taking phone calls on Ben Simmons. We always find that comical when we talk about him and his contract, but also the D'Angelo Russell angle of it about whether or not the Nets are open to that reunion. It's an expiring deal. That's the Lakers and what might happen here. But I do find it interesting, some of those bubble ups that are happening right now around Brooklyn, because we've assumed that it's this young core. We already had the conversation on Claxton. Yeah, it's 4 years, but does he fit either timeline depending on what the Nets do? Maybe not. I do wonder about what happens, not this offseason, but maybe going forward. Like Cam Thomas still is going to be a central figure in the Brooklyn Nets future, but I don't know if their new direction cements him being a part of that future. Like, I find that actually pretty fascinating, and maybe something like that we just assume his age and timeline fits everything and he's a scorer and that's great, but the rebuild can be so long that maybe it doesn't end up being as big a factor as we think it is in this moment. Does that make sense?
It does. I think he gets an extension almost for sure at this point, is my guess.
Because it won't matter. Gotta fill the
it won't
books.
exactly.
Fill the
So,
price.
and that's not a knock on him, by the way. It's like,
No.
hey, again, we gotta pay people. We gotta pay guys. We drafted him. He's been part of it. He's grown massively. There's a group of fans that absolutely love him, rightfully so. So I think we see an extension from him, because it's like, even if the extension was bad, which I'm not even saying it's gonna be, but even if it was bad, it won't be bad. Like, even if it's like one of those, quote Omar, it's like, from this caliber, from this range, even if I miss, I can't miss. Like, it's like, he's like, it's just not gonna, it's just not really gonna, it's not really gonna matter. And it could be great. And even if it's not, it's like, well, whatever. Like, that's just not what we're going to do. He can go fill it up. He can score a lot of points. We can sell some jerseys. Like, it's going to be all good. And then if he progresses into like a lead ball handler kind of guy, then even better. So it's like, we're kind of in a win-win situation. I think from like the rest of the roster point of view, it's just, you did a good job of mentioning sort of like throwing cold water on the ideas of like who could definitely be traded or whatnot. But I think the idea that they're open for business on all these guys is definitely true. It's, I think, the reality of whether it can happen is mixed. But with Cam, I think Cam is almost for sure a net here, at least for like the next 4 years. Wouldn't you say? Like, if you just had a bet right now, would you say that like that's more likely or less likely to happen?
More likely for sure, because there's no downside to him being here. And even if the best, quote unquote, best version of Cam Thomas is a guy that's a bucket, and the other areas don't fully fill out or develop the way you hope, that's still valuable. It's still valuable for you in the short term, and then it's valuable on another team in the long term. So like, those discussions can happen over the next couple of years. And that's kind of the point of what's going to shift here for Brooklyn. Free agency will play out. You'll get some more assets. You'll go to these next draft classes. You'll bring in young talent. You'll see how the pieces fit. You'll take flyers on guys, right? Like, you're going to continue to evolve the roster. So I think just the idea that, oh, well, Brooklyn, get through this year, be bad, get one of the top 3 picks. Okay, get Flag, get Ace Bailey, put him in the roster. Great. Now it's him and Clowney and Thomas. Like, okay, yes, for now, but then another year later, or those other 3 2025 picks that you have, those things are all going to factor in. You're going to try to piece together a roster. And I think for me, to close out today's episode, I look at a team like OKC and I say, this is a team that obviously, right, had all these picks in there, brought in all the young talent. And then this offseason, they go out, they sign Hartenstein. Maybe it makes the Claxton deal look that much better. But they go and get Caruso, a veteran experienced guard. You go and add in these little pieces to what you're doing here. And by the way, go look at their coffers, still filled with draft picks and capital and ability to be flexible. So like, they're that 3 years ahead, maybe even 4 years ahead of Brooklyn. But you can watch their model, I think, and track that for Brooklyn as this is the process we're hoping to do. Young player, have the hits, find the core, make some smart decisions, and suddenly you're right there near the top of a conference being competitive, relatively quickly. After 2 bad years, they were at least competitive. And then that 4th year, they obviously spiked and got to a number 1 seed.
And dude, I'll tell you, like, also like along those lines to some degree, but just to kind of maybe fold it back to the beginning of the episode too, seeing all these other moves in free agency. Now, again, some of these were put in place because of the Nets, like specifically the Knicks, but just about everything else was Nets independent, and seeing
Yeah.
all these other teams like get better, right? Like see the Thunder get better, see the Sixers get better, see Boston just lock it in for the next few years. And we'll see how
Dallas
see
would
Dallas.
play.
Dallas kind of pivots, but they're going to be good. Like, the Nuggets lose KCP, but they're still going to be really good. Seeing some of these other teams, you have to just feel so much better as a Nets fan. It's like, what were they going to do? What were they going to do? How are they ever going to compete with these other teams that were just
that's a
having
really
no
good, yeah.
problem? Like how they were having no problem getting better or staying basically the same. And so then you were going to look
That's a
at
really
the
good
Nets.
point.
If we had gotten out of this like let's say we had gotten out of this summer and it was like we signed Claxton and you would still be playing this unbelievably bad waiting game. And I'll tell you right now, it would look even worse because the Knicks would still be good too. Like they would have just kept Hartenstein, let's say. And we knew the Thunder would have gotten Caruso. Like it wouldn't have changed it that much. And we would just be looking at the situation like, what are they going to do? You'd be honestly, because by the way, Donovan Mitchell just signed his extension. So he's locked in there. But that came out while we were
remember that time when we thought we were getting him?
Well, maybe you say, okay, well, it doesn't happen because like whatever, and like Cleveland. So maybe there's other things. We'd be sitting right now. I'll tell you right now, we'd spend the whole season. We'd be like, hopefully Giannis wants out. That would be the whole season of talking.
Yeah,
that would be it.
Yep.
Because it'd be like you'd be staring at the one team, Milwaukee, where you like could really envision something going horribly off the tracks, and we would just spend all season either Mitchell didn't sign the extension, so we've spent a whole season hoping for Mitchell to not be still a championship level team, or we'll spend a whole season hoping for the demise of Giannis and hoping the Nets were like the one team that could go in and trade for him. That'd be the whole season.
Yeah.
That'd be it. So anyways, just seeing how this has unfolded with the Nets, knowing they don't need to like get into that muck and mire and hope and wish. They got another thing to hope and wish for, getting the top 3, top 1 pick, whatever. That's another sweat that we'll spend the whole season. It feels a little more controllable than the other thing, right? A little, and like that's all you want to kind of wonder is like what is a little more controllable and what sets you up a little better for the long term. It sure seems like this is the thing that does it. And when you look at the rest of the NBA, it was just going to be so hard to see how the Nets were ever going to be competitive with their previous apparent timeline.
Yeah, best version of this all season was still going to put the Brooklyn Nets probably on the edge of the play-in tournament on the back end of the playoffs in the Eastern Conference, scraping to be maybe a 500 team potentially. Good reminder there as well. Last note before we kick off here, keep an eye on Chicago. DeRozan, what happens with him? Chicago actually becomes probably the new team that is likely to be in and around the bottom of the NBA pick landscape. So that may be the new number 1 competitor for the Brooklyn Nets when it comes to getting the number 1 overall pick. But DeRozan, where is he going to go? What do teams need to do to make that kind of move? So try to look at the veteran players that are on the bad teams now. That's going to be the breadcrumb trail for where Brooklyn either maybe gets in the margins, maybe eats a bad contract, and starts to get into the fray of the NBA free agency.
All right, see you at the bottom, Bulls. We'll duke it out. We'll rock, paper, scissors at the end of the season. We're going to get out of here. Make sure you subscribe.
What's harder to beat, a bull or a net? Who wins?
I love when we actually just think about like the mascot of the Nets. It's like their mascot is a piece of equipment on the and like not even like
between that or backboards. They were going to be the backboards, but they went with nets.
The Brooklyn Rims, Okay, we're gonna get out of here. It's just it's so great. You never stop and think about it too much, and when you do, it's so ridiculous. I think the Bulls beat the Nets.
Brooklyn
Although maybe a net can catch a bull. I don't. Maybe a net can. Maybe a net. You toss it over a bull and you catch it. So there you go. We win. Make sure that and more hard hitting analysis is when you subscribe to Every Day to Locked On Nets. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you subscribe over on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen. Make sure you leave a review too. 5 stars or nothing. Don't leave a review if it's less than 5 stars. Don't bother. But if it's going to be a 5-star review, which it should be, make sure you do that wherever you listen to the Nets. Locked On Nets.
Losing is only temporary and not all-encompassing. You must simply study it, learn from it, and try not to lose the same way again. Then you must have the self-control to forget about it. That is Johnny Wooden.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back in tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.